welcome. This is India Sense. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. It's a brand new year and a brand new start to India Sense. Before we get you the headlines, this Friday evening, the QR code, viewers, that is coming on your screens is what you need to scan to get all the stories, perspectives and big interviews that matter to the global Indian. First up, headlines this Friday evening. From supporting the junta to openly backing rebels fighting it, India Sense exposes China's carrot and stick policy in Myanmar that is behind the present mess of the country. India ramps up security along crucial Siliguri corridor ahead of Islamabad's first military drills in Bangladesh since the 1971 Liberation War.
Creation of new counties will neither have a bearing on India's long-standing and consistent position regarding our sovereignty over the area, nor lend legitimacy to China's illegal and forcible occupation of the same.
New Delhi hits back after China's fresh attempts to make changes around the boundary. India rejects China's two so-called new counties with large parts of India's Aksai Chin territory in it. From economy to geopolitics, India Sense decodes what all will be New Delhi's priorities in the new year. And 2025 turns out to not be such a happy new year for Justin Trudeau. Caucus wants the Canadian Prime Minister to resign while public trolls Trudeau on his New Year break. And after 5 years of COVID outbreak, unconfirmed reports of a new pneumonia outbreak in China goes viral, puts the world on tenterhooks. 5 years on, is the world truly prepared to handle any pandemic? We start the first episode of India Sense in 2025 with probably the biggest crisis that's unfolding in the neighborhood, and that's Myanmar. And who's doing it is China's doing. The situation in Myanmar has reached a boiling point as ethnic armed organizations like the Arakan Army have gained the upper hand in the ongoing conflict. These groups now control large parts of territory, including key border points with Bangladesh, dealing a heavy blow to Myanmar's military junta. In fact, the map that we are going to put out for you viewers, that tells you exactly what's happening. For China, this power shift could be disastrous as it threatens its multi-billion-dollar infra projects and strategic investments in the country. And at the heart of China's interests lie the China-Myanmar economic corridor that you can see, a flagship initiative that promises to secure China's energy supplies while sidestepping the choke point that is the Strait of Malacca. But most think that Beijing is really part of the problem. Its support for the military junta after the 2021 coup, being the single largest provider of arms to the junta and trying to mainstream the brutal army have all contributed the mess that Myanmar is in right now. But that's only half of the complex geopolitical game. On one hand, China is making overtures to the junta, supporting infra projects like the new Yangon City and several others, the railway line. And on the other hand, it uses the carrot and stick strategy to reach out to the ethnic armed organizations as well, trying to cut their resources, cut their supply lines, try and make them also on China's side. But with this rising instability in Myanmar, what is really happening is that China's bet is actually now a double-edged sword. And the kicker really is that China has everything to lose. If the junta crumbles, it risks losing control of crucial territories and pipelines, not to mention the rare earth minerals that are essential to its high-tech industries. With rebel groups gaining ground in those resource-rich regions, Beijing is facing increasing disruptions to its supply chains. Prices of rare earth materials have surged, putting pressure on China's economy and, most importantly, its EV ambitions. In northern Shan state, meanwhile, Chinese investment projects are now under the control of rebels and People's Defense Forces, further complicating China's plans. These groups now hold the geopolitical leverage. They dictate the terms of trade and military influence along Myanmar's border with China, none of which is what Beijing really anticipated when it started getting into this Myanmar mess. And as the situation continues to spiral, China finds itself between a rock and a hard place. It is caught between supporting the embattled junta and maintaining a relationship with the increasingly powerful rebels with which it has no hold on. And it's not just Myanmar. The ripple effects are actually being felt in the entire region, including in India. The instability is pushing New Delhi to now shore up its defenses along the porous Myanmar-India border. And as China's investments face mounting risks, it may soon find itself on the losing end of a wider regional conflict, one that could drag India and several other players in it as well. Beijing has tried to juggle both sides, but in this high-risk game, it may soon discover that it cannot have its cake and eat it too. And suppose the junta falls and the rebels actually gain control. In that case, China will be left holding an empty bag, investments at risk, and strategic projects all hanging by a thread. In the end, China may have underestimated the stakes. Myanmar was meant to be a crown jewel in Beijing's BRI. Instead, it's turning out to be a costly gamble, one where China seems to have placed all the wrong bets. All right, shifting focus now to the first wide-angle story. It's a new year, and with it, there are new expectations. And we now tell what all should India now be looking forward to in 2025. Firstly, India should look forward to becoming a bigger economy. By all estimates, India will surpass Germany to become the fourth largest economy this year. Of course, with a growth bump, India needs to now make sure that private investments pick up. At 3.2% of the GDP, government cannot invest anymore. It has to come from private sector. Services will drive Indian economy, but answers will be needed on how to create jobs, especially for a young country like India. So that's something that's going to be a focus area that New Delhi needs to prioritize. The second thing that India will be looking forward to, well, is a Trump presidency. There's a fair chance that Prime Minister Modi may be invited to the inauguration ceremony, which is a first for any US president in over a century. His cabinet, his own position on Bangladeshi Hindus should give comfort to the present dispensation in New Delhi that the issue regarding Bangladeshi Hindus will be addressed by the US. As for tariffs, the impact will be felt. But let's remember that the average tariff rate in the 1960s was about 16%. It's now come down to 3%. The worst that can happen is it probably will go to 4, maybe 4.5%, after which it will start hurting the US consumers and probably, or hopefully, will be rolled back. The other thing that India needs to now look forward to is this year. It will play a pivotal role in the immediate neighborhood. The upheaval in Myanmar that we just spoke about, the slow recovery in Sri Lanka since its 2022 bankruptcy, the constant terror fighting that's taking place between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistan, and the downfall in Bangladesh due to the radical fringe elements that will all require New Delhi to step up using both diplomatic and, yes, economic tools. This year, India will emerge as the new fulcrum, not just in Asia, but in the world as well. All right, shifting focus now to the other big story that we are tracking and the second wide-angle story. For 54 years after the birth of Bangladesh, the country under Muhammad Yunus is now forging ties with its arch-enemy, Pakistan, the one with which it wanted to break away. Dhaka and Islamabad are closing ranks after decades of estrangement since the birth of Bangladesh, and India now faces a two-front challenge, one where China and Myanmar are bound to compound matters. This report tells you what are India's options in 2025 of this emerging scenario.
India is facing an escalating threat as military ties between Pakistan and Bangladesh surge to unprecedented levels. The high-stakes power play could alter the balance of security in South Asia. BSF is keeping a close vigil along the high-security North Bengal frontier, which guards the critical Siliguri corridor, a lifeline for India's northeastern states. The corridor's strategic importance has never been more apparent.
मैंने अभी पूरा नॉर्थ बंगाल का जो हमारा फ्रंटियर है उसका पूरा दौरा किया है और मैंने पाया है कि बीएसएफ के द्वारा अपनी जिम्मेवारी बहुत अच्छे से निभाई जा रही है बॉर्डर गार्डिंग के संबंध में.
It is the heartbeat of India's northeastern defense, with Pakistan and Bangladesh forging an increasingly dangerous alliance. India has no choice but to ramp up its security. This region is now ground zero in a growing regional security crisis. In a shocking development, Pakistan's Joint Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Sahir Shamshad Mirza, is scheduled to visit Dhaka, the first such visit in over half a century. The move signals a dramatic shift in regional geopolitics as old enemies seem to be converging in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. The embers of old conflict, dating back to the bloody 1971 Liberation War, are being reignited. Pakistan and Bangladesh, once fierce adversaries, are now inching towards an alliance. The momentum for this shift began in Cairo, where Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif met with Bangladesh interim leader Muhammad Yunus. Details of their talks remain secret, but the implications are clear. Old wounds are being mended, and a new, more dangerous alliance is emerging. But the danger doesn't stop here. In February, Pakistani soldiers will train Bangladeshi forces for the first time since the 1971 war. To make matters worse, Bangladesh's Navy will participate in Pakistan's Aman maritime exercise. The move speaks volumes about the growing military alignment between the two nations. But perhaps the most alarming development is Pakistan's recent arms deal with Bangladesh. In August 2023, Islamabad supplied Dhaka with 60 tons of RDX and ammunition. India's BSF is now closely monitoring the situation, especially along the Teen Bigha corridor, one of the most sensitive border areas between India and Bangladesh. The newfound bonhomie between former East Pakistan and Pakistan rests on a common animosity towards India. But the question remains, how will this change the power balance in the region, with volatilities in Myanmar and China's deep linkages to Islamabad?
First inside story on the show. Is history about to repeat itself? In a move that's raising eyebrows across the globe, tensions are rising. China has ramped up its monitoring of respiratory diseases just as winter sets in. Why? Because there are cases of pneumonia from unknown origins already creeping upward. The question that everybody is asking now is this the start of another COVID-like crisis? China's National Defense Disease Control and Prevention Administration has announced that it's piloting a new system to track pneumonia and other respiratory infections. But there are concerns, and there should be, because there are parallels to the early days of the COVID-19 virus in 2020 and late 2019, when China's lack of timely information set the stage for a global pandemic that took millions of lives, disrupted life and livelihood, all of which that China could have prevented just by telling on time, which is why the world is wary this time around. Just like the early days of COVID-19, the lack of detailed information is now causing alarm. Data recently released shows an uptick in respiratory infections, particularly among children under the age of 14, mostly in northern provinces. Authorities are trying to downplay that, exactly how they did 5 years back, because till this day, it still remains unclear if the genesis of the COVID-19 virus was in fact China's animal markets. As the news spreads reminiscent of the COVID-19 scare 5 years ago, people are asking, will China be caught flat-footed again? And most importantly, will this time around it will be transparent, tell the world what is happening and ensure that the world is better prepared, unlike 2020. All right, on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back on the other side with our top voice on the show, the UN Special Rapporteur for Myanmar, talking about what all is set to happen in Myanmar and how China's influence is actually muddying the waters more. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching India Sense. As said, the top voice this week is the UN Special Rapporteur for Myanmar, Thomas Andrew, speaking to us about what really is unfolding in Myanmar. Mr. Andrew, thanks much for taking out the time and speaking to me on India's sense. Let me start by asking you, firstly, what do you think is China's role in the mess that Myanmar is in right now?
It's a very good question, and of course we need to see. China has a great deal at stake, both in terms of its business interests and the fact that it's very significant border interests with Myanmar. They've been engaging with all players most recently. They have a lot to lose in this in a conflagration right across their border, and they recognize that, and they've been working to try to address it. On the one hand, the opposition, the resistance through the National Unity Government is represented in the United Nations General Assembly. They have that seat. The Myanmar seat is held by someone who is very much opposed to the military junta. That is an encouraging sign, and the only reason that is possible is because of China, as a member of the Credentials Committee, has not objected to that. So that's a very positive step forward. On the other hand, China is the second largest source of weapons for the military junta in the world. So we have a complex situation, but we have the fundamentals for China, namely the great stake that they have in a stable border over in Myanmar, and the business interests that they have in Myanmar create significant incentives for them to try to be a force for stabilization and security in that region. We'll see. I mean, I know that discussions have been held with a variety of the players on the ground.
Yes.
Some have worked out, some have not. But certainly the fundamental is that China has a great deal at stake in what's going on in Myanmar.
Okay. The junta has said that they're going to hold an election right now. Is that possible under the present situation?
Well, there is no way that there could possibly be an election under these conditions. I mean, you cannot have an election where you detain tens of thousands of political prisoners, where you torture them, where you execute them, where it's illegal to report the truth in Myanmar, where voicing opposition to the military junta is a crime. I mean, it's ludicrous, not to mention the fact that there's a huge conflict going on in the country. There's just no way that a free and fair election could possibly occur under these conditions. In fact, what it really is an attempt to create the mirage of a democracy. And the reason it's important for the junta to try to pull this off is because, listen, they need three things to survive. They need money, they need weapons, and they need legitimacy. They've been losing access to weapons. Their sources of weapons have dropped by a third over the course of the last year. They're having very, very difficult time getting access to financing, and certainly legitimacy is a third area that they believe they could try to make headway on with respect to having an election later this year. I think it's really important for the nations of the world to call this so-called election what it really is, namely a fraud, and that particularly democracies of the world make it clear that you cannot possibly have an election, a free and fair election, under these conditions, and to be pushing and advancing the fundamentals of what a free and fair election is, and the ingredients to such a free and fair election, and the clear evidence that none of those conditions exist right now. I think we have to be very firm and clear that we reject this notion of an election in Myanmar under these conditions as an international community.
Myanmar affects Bangladesh, China, India, the entire region. And now you have Bangladesh Army Chief relying on China to address the Rohingya crisis. But one would say China is part of the problem. Do you see such overtures making matters worse?
Well, I think the first and foremost, I think we all have to recognize that things are getting worse, and that what is being attempted at this point, whether it be China or really anybody else, is not working. We need a change of course. And trying to deal with this situation incrementally, trying to gain some strategic advantage one way or the other, has simply failed. And what we need to be doing is looking at it in a comprehensive way to minimize the extent to which the junta, the military junta, is able to continue these atrocities. We need to take away their sources of weapons. We need to take away their sources of money, and we need to take away their legitimacy, the three key ingredients to their survival. Unless and until we do that, we can only see things getting worse. And the incremental attempts that we've tried up to this point as an international community or as players in the region have attempted simply have not worked. A change of course is imperative.
All right, Mr. Thomas Andrew, thanks much for speaking to me on an issue that we're going to revisit hopefully soon. All right, second inside story on the show. Justin Trudeau didn't have a good 2024. It even ended on a bad note for him. Take a look at this report that tells you why 2025 could be even worse for the Canadian Prime Minister. 2025 is shaping up to be a not-so-happy new year for Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and the writing's on the wall. A new poll from Nanos Research shows the federal Conservatives holding a commanding 47% support, far outstripping the Liberals, who are stuck at just 21%. Jagmeet Singh's NDP are closing in with 17%. As if that's not enough, his political house of cards is well on its path to collapse. Liberal MP George Chahal has joined the chorus of voices calling for the Prime Minister to step down just months ahead of the 2025 federal election. Chahal's echoed the calls of Senator Percy Down and MPs like Ken MacDonald, both urging for new leadership. The pressure is mounting as over 24 caucus members have now publicly asked the Prime Minister to reflect on his future. Despite growing calls from his own caucus to resign, Trudeau has taken some time off on a ski holiday, likely reflecting on whether it's time to bow out gracefully or fight to the bitter end. But the pressure isn't just coming from inside Parliament. Public discontent is spilling onto the streets. A shocking moment unfolded recently at a British Columbia ski resort where Trudeau was heckled in a way that could only be described as brutal.
Mr. Prime Minister.
While enjoying a day on the slopes at Red Mountain Resort in Rossland, British Columbia, a member of the public spotted the Prime Minister and let him have it, telling him to get the dash out.
Please get the out of BC.
Have a wonderful day, ma'am.
Yeah.
The incident, caught on camera and shared widely on X, highlights just how deep the public's frustration runs with the Prime Minister. With his political future now hanging in the balance, it's clear that Trudeau is now facing the fight of his life. But that is a wrap on this edition of India Sense. Thanks so much for watching.